On the evening of January 15, 1989, a New York telephone operator received a chilling call that would become one of the most debated pieces of evidence in a murder case. A woman's voice screamed desperately into the phone saying someone was killing her. The call was abruptly disconnected. Police rushed to respond, but an outdated reverse directory sent them to the wrong address. By the time Paul Solomon returned to his Greenberg condominium later that night, he found his wife Betty Jean lying face down in a pool of blood on the living room floor. She had been shot 9 times with a small caliber pistol. What seemed like a dying woman's final plea for help would eventually be questioned as something far more sinister, a calculated move by a killer to create the perfect alibi. Betty Jean Solomon was 40 years old when her life ended in violence. She was a devoted mother to her teenage daughter Kristen and worked as an account executive at a collection agency in Mamaroneck, New York. Friends described her as kind and trusting, someone who always gave people the benefit of the doubt. She had married Paul Solomon in 1970 after meeting him at college, and they had built what appeared to be a typical suburban life in Westchester County. But beneath the surface, their marriage had been crumbling for years. Paul had engaged in multiple affairs, and Betty Jean had even considered leaving him at one point. Despite the troubles, they had decided to stay together for their daughter. Paul Solomon initially became the prime suspect in his wife's murder. His behavior on the night of January 15th raised immediate red flags. He had disabled his own car by hooking it up to a battery charger, forcing Betty Jean to remain home without transportation. He then inexplicably went to a local bowling alley around 6 in the evening, where he made sure people recognized him, almost as if he was establishing an alibi. After leaving the bowling alley, Paul met with Carolyn Warmus, a 25-year-old school teacher who worked at the same elementary school where he taught. The two had been involved in an affair for over a year. They spent the evening together at a restaurant and later had sexual relations in her car before Paul returned home to discover his wife's body. Carolyn Warmus came from wealth and privilege. Her father was a self-made multimillionaire insurance executive with assets estimated at $150 million. She had graduated from the University of Michigan with a degree in psychology before earning a master's degree in elementary education from Columbia University. In September 1987, she took a job at Greenville Elementary School in Scarsdale, where she met Paul Solomon. Despite knowing he was married with a teenage daughter, Warmus began pursuing him relentlessly. The affair started in 1987 and quickly became an obsession for Warmus. When Paul Solomon initially gave police his alibi, he failed to mention his meeting with Carolyn Warmus. But as additional witnesses confirmed seeing them together that night, the truth emerged. Detectives began to look more closely at the young school teacher, who seemed unable to let go of her married lover. Even after the murder, Warmus continued her pursuit of Solomon with disturbing intensity. She followed him and his new girlfriend to Puerto Rico while they were on vacation. She made hundreds of phone calls to his home. Her behavior suggested someone who would do anything to possess the man she wanted. The investigation took a crucial turn when police learned that Warmus had obtained a firearm shortly before the murder. Vincent Parco, a Manhattan private investigator, testified that Warmus had approached him in the summer of 1988 asking for a gun. She claimed she needed protection because her family members were allegedly in danger. In early January 1989, just days before Betty Jean's murder, Parco sold Warmus a .25 caliber Beretta pistol equipped with a custom-made silencer for $2,500. The murder weapon was never found, but shell casings recovered at the scene matched the type of ammunition used in the gun Parco sold to Warmus. Detective Richard Constantino decided to examine Carolyn Warmus's phone records from the day of the murder. What he discovered would become the most damaging evidence against her. At 3:02 in the afternoon on January 15th, a 5-minute phone call was made from Warmus's Manhattan apartment to Ray's Sport Shop in North Plainfield, New Jersey. Store records showed that later that same day, a woman purchased .25 caliber ammunition using a driver's license belonging to someone named Lisa Katai. When police questioned Katai, she denied ever visiting the gun shop or buying ammunition. She explained that her driver's license had been lost or stolen while she worked a summer job in Manhattan, where one of her co-workers happened to be Carolyn Warmus. The phone call to the gun shop placed Warmis in a direct timeline leading to the murder. She had called the store in the afternoon, purchased ammunition using a stolen license, and then Betty Jean Solomon was shot to death that evening with a weapon that used the exact type of ammunition bought that day. The circumstantial web was tightening around Warmis, but the most puzzling piece of evidence remained that initial emergency call made from the Solomon home. Who actually made that desperate call to the operator saying someone was being killed? The telephone was found disconnected from the wall jack, lying on the floor near the dining table. No blood was found on the phone, which seemed strange if Betty Jean had made the call while being shot. The operator testified that she could not state positively whether the caller said he or she was killing me. This ambiguity became critical to understanding what really happened. Investigators developed a chilling theory about the emergency call. If Carolyn Warmis was the killer, making that call would have served a brilliant purpose. By calling police and establishing a specific time for the murder around 7:15 in the evening, she was ensuring that Paul Solomon had a solid alibi. He was at the bowling alley and later at the restaurant with Warmis herself during that time frame. By saying someone was killing her instead of identifying herself, the killer was also deflecting suspicion. Warmis needed Solomon to be in the clear because she wanted him for herself, not in prison. The defense team tried to counter the mounting evidence by producing their own phone record. This document showed no call to Ray's sports shop, but instead showed a call made from Warmis's apartment to her mother in Michigan at 6:44 in the evening. If Warmis made this call, it would have been virtually impossible for her to drive from Manhattan to Greenburgh and commit the murder by 7:15. But the prosecution suspected this phone bill was a forgery. Technicians from the phone company testified that their computer records definitively showed a call was made from Warmis's phone to the gun shop on January 15th. They also established that the paper the defense phone bill was printed on was not even delivered to the company until February 13th, 1989, nearly a month after the murder. The alleged alibi document was dated January 22nd. It was a devastating blow to the defense. Carolyn Warmis's first trial began in January 1991. The prosecution painted her as a woman consumed by obsession, driven by a desperate need to possess Paul Solomon at any cost. They presented the phone records, the gun purchase, the ammunition bought with a stolen license, and the timeline that placed everything together on the day of the murder. The defense argued that Warmis was being framed, that perhaps Solomon himself or the private investigator Vincent Parco could have been involved. After 12 days of deliberation, the jury announced they were hopelessly deadlocked at 8-4 in favor of conviction. The judge declared a mistrial. A second trial began in January 1992. This time, prosecutors introduced a new piece of evidence that would seal Warmis's fate. A bloody cashmere glove belonging to Warmis had been spotted in a crime scene photograph, but had not been recovered during the initial investigation. Paul Solomon claimed he found the glove in his house 3 years after the killing. The prosecution also presented credit card receipts showing that Warmis had purchased a pair of black cashmere gloves at a department store in Scarsdale in November 1987. The glove became the physical link that the first trial had lacked. On May 26, 1992, after 6 days of deliberation, the jury found Carolyn Warmis guilty of second-degree murder and illegal possession of a firearm. Judge John Carey showed no mercy at sentencing. He called the crime a hideous act, a most extreme, illegal, and wanton murder. Warmis received the maximum sentence of 25 years to life in prison for the murder, plus 5 to 15 years for the weapon charge to be served concurrently. For the first time during both trials, a weeping Warmis spoke in court. She insisted she was innocent and asked for leniency, claiming she was guilty only of being foolish enough to believe the lies and promises Paul Solomon had made to her. The case captivated the nation and earned the nickname The Fatal Attraction Murder due to its eerie parallels with the 1987 thriller film starring Glenn Close. The media portrayed Warmis as a seductive femme fatale who killed in a jealous rage, and the sensational details of the affair with Solomon only fueled public fascination. 2 television movies and a book were produced about the case. Warmis served 27 years behind bars at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women before being released on parole in June 2019. She has maintained her innocence throughout her incarceration and beyond. The phone call that started it all, that brief moment of a woman's voice crying out in distress, remains central to understanding this case. Whether it was Betty Jean Solomon's final desperate attempt to save herself or Carolyn Warmus's calculated move to provide her lover with an alibi, that call exposed the carefully planned nature of the murder. The subsequent investigation revealed phone records that tracked ammunition purchases, gun acquisitions, and a timeline that all pointed to premeditation. In the end, it was not a single smoking gun that convicted Carolyn Warmus, but rather a web of circumstantial evidence woven together by phone calls, purchases, and obsessive behavior. The one call to Ray's sports shop on the afternoon of January 15th connected all the pieces, showing that someone had carefully planned to obtain ammunition on the very day a woman would be shot 9 times in her own home.